Oxford at night was still so serene, still seemed like a place where they were safe, where arrest was impossible. It still looked like a city carved out of the past, of ancient spires, pinnacles, and turrets, of soft moonlight on old stones and worn cobbled roads. Its buildings were still so reassuringly heavy, solid, ancient, and eternal. The lights shone through the arched windows still promised warmth, old books, and hot tea within, still suggested an idyllic scholar's life, where ideas were abstract entertainments that could be bandied about without consequences. But the dream was shattered. Babel by rfkuang is a story set in the early 1800s, and we're following a young Chinese boy from Canton. When a cholera outbreak sweeps through his home, his mother dies from the illness, but with the touch of a silver bar, Robin, as he will be called, is saved. The boy is visited by a mysterious Oxford professor. Robin is later brought to London to the home of the professor, and after a childhood ruled by language study, Robin is enrolled in the Intensive Royal Institute of Translation at Oxford, also known as Babel. Babel powers the British Empire with its production of magic silver bars, engraved and imbued with special abilities to enhance the objects it's attached to, speeding transportation, powering factories, and ultimately supporting imperial domination. As Robin and the three others in his cohort at Babel discover the hidden cost, they have to decide whether to continue betraying their morality or to commit the ultimate betrayal, translating Babel's corruption to the world. I finally read Babel by rfkuang. I've had this copy on my shelf since last year, and I'm really glad that I was able to read it this year. This book is so impressive and intimidating, and I can totally understand why so many readers loved it. This one celebrates things like the mildew smell of old books, rainy Oxford days, and the tired that you feel after long hours of study. But it also exposes the negatives, right? Like the overwork, the privilege of studying something of special interest, corruption of character that can take place in this setting, and the myth of preparing for a future that perhaps scholarship just cannot prepare you for it. For a historical fantasy with themes of elitism, this one still feels like it has a pretty high barrier of entry for most readers, or award on it, if you will. It felt a lot like reading someone's doctoral thesis if they covered both a fictional event and a historical time period in the same work. There are footnotes in here. There are also passages of historical incidents that are known facts and others that are fictionalized. There's a running commentary in this book about the terrifying progress of colonialism, racism, and white privilege in history and today. That's kind of like the heaviest thing that you will carry away from this book is those themes. Despite my regard for the work that went into this book, I did feel like putting it down at times. Every time that I thought about putting it down, there was a Rebecca F. Kuang twist, something that happened that just upped the ante, something terrifying and dramatic and out of character. This one is not a favorite for me. It's not something that I would mark to reread at a future date, but I'm still in awe about the sheer amount of work that must have gone into this novel. As I said, I think it deserves all of the accolades that it's been getting, and I'm so glad that so many readers love it. It didn't make me cry so much as frown as I was reading it. I felt like I was developing forehead wrinkles while I was reading this one because you just have to stay so concentrated as you read this book. I think I might cry at the end of a book-to-screen adaptation of this one. The characters were really brought to life with some really good acting. I think that the premise of the story, and especially the ending, would really hit home, and I might have some tears to shed in that case. In A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid, Effie Sayre has grown up reading and rereading a favorite book, a tragic fairy tale called Engelberth. It's the story of a mortal girl who marries a fairy king and then destroys him. For most of her life, Effie has also seen the fairy king haunting her dreams and standing forebodingly in the corner of her vision. The author of her favorite book, Murden, has been literally enshrined in the public eye, but his life and estate has been shrouded in mystery. Effie still treasures books, but she's studying architecture in college. So when her favorite author's estate announces a contest to redesign its manor, Effie excitedly enters. Effie wins the contest, but on arriving at the manor, she realizes that renovating this sinking house is like an impossible quest from a fairy tale. Another student is staying at the manor too, Preston, a young literature scholar who believes that the foundation of Murden's renown is as questionable as his moldering manor. The next book that I read was A Study in Drowning by Reid. This was one that I had borrowed from the library, and it's the first book that I've read by Reid, period. Going into this one, I initially felt a little bit defensive of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies because it felt like this book was trying to steal a lot of the different story elements from that book. But as I got deeper into the story, I realized that this is a completely different tale. It definitely has some elements in common, but it's a distinctly different story. In this book, we do have that dark academia base. We have two students who meet at university and their academic rivals. There's also just this infusion of past trauma in our characters' lives and how that is impacting them. I feel is very common for Reid's books from what I've heard. Then there's this intrusion of the supernatural and an unreliable narrator. So we as the reader are really quite unsure of the reality of what is happening. I had that unfortunate experience of guessing what the main twist would be way ahead of the characters in this book, which can be frustrating sometimes. But it was still a very absorbing and I would say a tense story. A completely different book that I think is a great palate cleanser if you're in between classics or more adult reads, The Improbable Tales of Baskerville Hall by Ellie Standish. This is a middle grade historical fantasy set in the world of Sherlock Holmes, but we have the character of young Arthur Conan Doyle who exists in the same reality. Our story opens on our main character, Arthur Doyle, who, due to some unforeseen circumstances, is put forward for a full scholarship to a mysterious boarding school. On his arrival at the school, Arthur is immediately introduced to new friends and a rival in the form of Jimmy Moriarty. When he and his new friends are selected for a secret society at the school, Arthur will stumble into a mystery that's bigger and a little older than he bargained for. This one was just fun. If you have some background on the history of Arthur Conan Doyle, I think that you're going to appreciate this book even more. If you know who he was as a person and the things that he was interested in, I think you're going to really appreciate some of the Easter eggs that are told throughout this story. The characters in this one didn't really leap off the page for me in the same way that some other middle grades have the power to do. But I would say it's still worth a read. It's the first book in a series, so we can only hope that it will continue to get more colorful from there. As I mentioned, I listened to this one on audiobook and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I hope that you've been enjoying what you've been reading lately, both savory and sweet, and I look forward to seeing you in another video soon.